since Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, the pricing of an average house in the country has doubled, and it is much worse in the number one destination for newcomers to Canada, namely Toronto and Vancouver. In fact, in the last year alone, the prices in Toronto have gone up nearly 30% in 1 year. Here to join us to talk about it is our friend Spencer Fernando, whose latest article is called "Freeland Admits Federal Immigration Policy Has Driven Up Housing Costs." Spencer, great to see you again. I think this is a kind of breakthrough. It's one of the first times I can remember a Liberal actually acknowledging that immigration is driving demand, which is driving price. I mean, whether or not the Liberals admit it, it is how supply and demand works. But I think she admits it. Having the highest immigration policy of the G7 is causing the highest housing prices of the G7.
Yeah, it's interesting to, see her say that. I've seen people on Twitter noting that if a conservative politician were to have said something similar, they'd be, attacked as anti-immigrant, anti-immigration, racist, bigoted, all of those things. And so it's interesting that she's saying that, but she is correct, obviously. I mean, it is a simple supply and demand issue. The only problem is, of course, after she acknowledged the truth, she basically went on and said, oh, this is great, and this is how we're growing the economy. And obviously, thinking that you're growing the economy just by bringing in more people as opposed to having per capita GDP growth is obviously a serious problem. And it's concerning to see the finance minister kind of falling into a logical trap like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, when you add people to an economy, when you bring people, when you do any activity, it is GDP, but it's like the broken windows fallacy. And I'm not comparing it to immigration. I'm just comparing the logical flaw. If you break a window, if you have a car accident, the GDP goes up, but it's not productive GDP. If you smash a window, okay, you created a job for a glazier, but you haven't improved people's wealth. You burned it up. Immigration can be a tremendous source of growth and wealth, actually, but it depends on who's coming. And one of the things that Trudeau boasts about is that while there are some economically strong, like professional class immigrants, the plurality of the immigrants under Trudeau's current immigration scheme are people who are either family members or they're refugees. They're not economic. So while we may be bringing in, say, 200,000 people a year who are probably net positive on the GDP side, we're bringing in 150,000 a year who are not investor class or professional class.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a balance, right? Because you have, for example, if someone has a large family, they may be an entrepreneur and then they bring over a relative and they can help take care of their children. So, there can be benefits there as well. But I think, the deeper problem is that we don't discuss immigration in this country in a mature way. A mature country is able to have people who say, well, I think we should have more immigration. Other people say we should have less immigration. But somehow in Canada, it's become almost everybody in the political establishment basically feels pressured to go along with whatever the current highest number is. As I note in the article, if someone supports, say about half the immigration level we have now. So say they said they want 230,000 or 240,000 people to come into the country every year. As a percentage of our economy, that would give us one of still the highest immigration rates in the world. And that would be in most countries kind of the maximalist pro-immigration position. Whereas, the other side of it would be people saying they want much less. Whereas in Canada, if someone says, oh, we should, have 240,000 people come in every year, that's considered a huge cut to immigration. And they will be called anti-immigrant in many cases. So I think the fact that the debate on immigration in Canada has become so, it's emotional, it's political, everybody demonizes everybody. I think that's a real drawback for the future of the country, because we should be able to have, a logical, a reasonable and balanced debate about this issue.
Angus Reid is one of the few pollsters who regularly test that question. Actually, I'm sure all pollsters do, but Angus Reid is one of the few who publish it. And overwhelmingly, Canadians say either we have enough, or the number is just right, or the number is too high. Very, very few, always less than 10%, say we need more, and yet Trudeau increases the number every time. I think this is one of those issues where if a politician were to say it very gently and very carefully and in a way that allowed no misinterpretation that it was a race-based thing, but rather on an economic basis, if we've just doubled the cost of housing in this country, you know, don't tell me how this is wonderful for our GDP if inflation is now close to 7%. No young people can get a house. You know, the fact that the GDP is doing well, but no one can afford to buy a house, you know, that might work in Chrystia Freeland's world, but I don't think it works for ordinary Canadians.
Yeah, and I think there's also the issue of, I guess you could say, economic illiteracy is obviously a serious problem, even apparently at the higher echelons of the Liberal government. But this idea that, you know, if you make the economy bigger overall, that you're actually benefiting people, like that's not really how it works, right? You know, say somehow we decided tomorrow that we were going to double Canada's population. You know, people from every part of the world came in, and we got to, I guess, what would be 74, 75 million people or so. Okay, well, we'd probably have a much bigger GDP than we do now, certainly. But everybody else would be much poorer on an individual basis, right? Everything would massively increase in price. There would just be chaos in the country. And so, sure, the overall economy would be bigger, but we'd all be worse off. And so, you know, that's the issue with immigration, is you have to have it at a level that is benefiting the country and reducing some of the drawbacks that, you know, very high immigration can cause. And we just don't have that discussion. As you said, you know, polls show a lot of Canadians want to see a change in the immigration numbers. People either think there's enough people coming in yearly already, or there should be fewer people coming in. And very few people in the political, you know, the political class in this country are willing to actually talk about that.
You know, it seems sort of obvious to me that just like spending in a country can go up and down depending on the economic cycle, immigration can too. I mean, if immigration is leading to a depression in wages and an increase in housing prices, it seems like a lever that you can adjust. You know, if you're in a recession or if you're in boom times, that you can adjust government spending too. I mean, the whole theory of Keynesian economics was that when times are amazing, the government puts the brakes on a bit and maybe runs a surplus. And in tough times, the government, you know, it's counter-cyclical. So if things are tough, well, maybe that's when the government spends more. And I'm not necessarily a Keynesian, but the point is, it's not always run a deficit. And the thing about immigration is it's not always more. There may be times when less is the answer, when their wages can't keep up with the cost of living, when housing is doubled in 4 years, there may be a time to pump the brakes. You know, the funny thing about Chrystia Freeland, I just remembered it, when she came back to Canada from New York, where she had been working for years, she bought a house so that she could say she lived in her neighborhood in Toronto. She had to get her dad to co-sign the mortgage. Now, I'm not making a lot of fun of her, although I think it is sort of a little bit odd that a woman in her 40s in the cabinet can't, you know, doesn't have the credit to get her own house. But if the deputy prime minister herself needs help to buy a house, she's a bit glib with people who are not of her station in life, who need help to buy a house, or frankly, there's no hope for them at all. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.